Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
Reddit, what is your most disturbing, scary, or creepy real story? Serious. Episode 8. I got lost on the bad side of town many years ago and stopped at a Circle K to ask for directions. One of the guys standing outside the store came up to my window and said, "Hey, I'm going that way, I can show you how to get there," and me being the idiot 18-year-old female that I was said, "Sure." About 3 miles into the journey, the guy turns to me and says, "By now I could have raped and killed you. I'm only telling you this because it happened to my sister 2 years ago. You seem like a really nice girl, and I would really hate to hear that something bad happened to you. Sorry to scare you, but if it saves your life then I've done my job. You can let me out here." A similar thing happened on my first day at a door-to-door sales job. A guy told me to come into his house so he could get his checkbook, and once again idiot 18-year-old me went in. He went through a similar story. Don't ever go into someone's house that you don't know. It's really quite amazing that I made it to my age, now that I think of it. My house is a church from the 1700s with a cemetery and all right out front. Needless to say, I have had a lot of creepy, scary stuff go down. All of my following situations will be tied together at the end. Here we go. One day I walked up to my room and found my phone charger disconnected from the wall beside my bed. It was under all my dirty clothes and the wire had also been disconnected from the part that goes into the wall. Put it all back, no problem. This happened for 3 consecutive days. On that third day, I put it back into the wall beside my bed. I had some difficulty getting it into the wall and started hitting random things on my touch screen, felt the vibrations. When I finally looked at my phone, I pulled up the call screen and dialed 666. I was in my upstairs bathroom a few summers ago. Right outside that bathroom there is a long hallway that leads to my parents' bedroom and a spare bedroom at the end. When I left the bathroom I looked down the hall and saw a man standing there. He looked at me for a few seconds, then he turned and walked into the spare bedroom. I had a dream that felt like it lasted all night long one time. The entire dream was the typical little girls in white dresses. They were standing beside my bed, watching me sleep. Me and my girlfriend at the time, a few years ago, heard a distinct whistle in my bedroom. Nobody was ever home when we heard it. I think we heard it on 3 separate occasions. I was laying on my bed late one night, after midnight, with my head at the end where my feet usually are, just watching TV. Out of nowhere, the strings on my acoustic guitar strummed right next to me. I had to grab something in my room really quick one time and sat down on my bed. I read a text message. I felt an impression in the bed next to me, felt a small wind, and heard the air that would release if you flopped on a bed, all at the same time. To tie it all together, I invested in a digital voice recorder to see if I could pick up some frequencies that we can't hear. I asked about the whistling and heard no answer, no whistle, anything in person. Played the tape back and heard that same distinct whistle a few seconds after I asked. I asked if they like my guitars because I heard them playing with them. Played it back and heard a female giggle, had that dream about the little girls. Went to the room where I saw the man walking and asked if there was anyone there. All hell broke loose. I heard a grown, heavy man voice respond to every question I asked. Nothing legible, more like grunts and IHUHS. When I asked him to give me a sign that he's here, like tapping or something, tapping began on the TV that was in the room. So, I kept asking questions and gained information through tap responses. It was pretty crazy. Haven't used the recorder since. I was kind of freaked out. Though I never found anything negative that would have explained the 666 on my phone. A few years ago, I worked in a shoe store. It was not a busy store, so we would only have one person there to close. One night I was putting away a stock of shoes when the Musac, a CD of music sent by corporate, got really quiet, in the middle of a song. Then this old-timey song started playing, very quietly. It sounded like it was coming from a phonograph, being played on an incredibly old and dirty record. There was a man singing in this exceptionally low, bluesy-sounding voice. It was so low that you could barely hear the words, but I made out, God, Satan, evil, kill, etc. It lasted for about 20 seconds, then the normal song resumed playing at the normal volume. I would hear this randomly while I was closing throughout the next few months. Always during different songs, and even different CDs. I found out that another girl I worked with had also heard it while she was alone. I honestly have no idea what it was. Just got a new house about 4 months ago. It is kind of old, and the electrical infrastructure is weird. Light switches aren't always in obvious places, and there are a lot of unaccounted for switches that we flip by accident at times, to no obvious effect. I quickly noticed that there is an outdoor light just outside my bedroom window that is often, but not always, on in the middle of the night. There is no obvious switch that controls it. I figured the switch was just somewhere random in the house, and we were just accidentally flipping its switch on during the day sometimes, and later accidentally flipping it off. I keep curtains pulled on the window, but one night, it was really bugging me, so I scoured the house looking for the right switch. Never found it, and the mystery remained. The light is still randomly on in the middle of the night sometimes. A couple of weeks ago, I solved it. Light is activated by motion right outside my window. Tears. A few years ago, me and my partner were alone in her parents' house for a fortnight and a series of very odd things happened. One night after we'd gone to bed I woke up to use the bathroom. When I went downstairs the cushions were strewn over the couch and some were piled up in the corner. Knowing my partner tidies each room before bed immediately struck me as odd but still needed to use the bathroom. I'd been sitting there for a couple of minutes when I heard a loud knocking on the bathroom door. It's directly in front of the toilet so I saw the door moving in the frame. 2 seconds, I explained to what I thought was my partner, but I got no reply. All I could hear on the other side was a rasping breath, loud and rhythmic. After I was finished I sheepishly opened the door and of course nothing was there. When I got back upstairs my partner had heard the knocking and wondered what I was doing. I explained and she was very creeped out. I think it was the next day we were in the living room when we heard a huge bang. It was massive, sounding like a gunshot. Immediately the power went off, so after I turned the power back on we went to investigate. We found the dining room mirror had become bizarre and destroyed the power outlet below. It must have fallen vertically but when we checked the wire that attached the mirror was intact and the wall fixture was also fine. Again, this isn't supernatural but neither of us could explain it at all. Over the next few days, the dining room furniture would rearrange itself, chairs often pulling out whilst we were in the other room. We would hear the distinctive sound of someone sitting down. We'd hear people talking in other rooms and of course they'd fall silent as you'd enter. Sometimes things will still happen, most often odd noises or items of furniture moving, oftentimes heavy things that take a couple of people to move ordinarily. I was 17 in high school working at a country club. The country club was in a rich city 20 minutes from home. To get home I drive just along the borders or mildly through Detroit but it's honestly not bad. I notice at some point I'm being followed late one Saturday night. It's a long stretch on one main road but the guys are tracking me. Even though there's 3 lanes and all are completely open he always pulls behind me on a light, if I change lanes he changes lanes. I'm getting closer to home and he's making all the same turns as me. I get one side street from home and take it and start doing random turns and circles down the streets, sometimes looping the same block twice. I'm freaking out. He never once flashed his lights for me to stop or honked a horn or pulled up alongside me. Just kept following me. Being 17 and not knowing what to do at this point I go home. I pull up in my drive, go inside, all the lights are off already. I don't turn them on, and I peer out the window. He parks a house down and across the street. I freak out, wake up my mother, she calls the police. The guy gets out of his car, looks at our house, looks around and then begins walking a few houses over, a few houses back, and repeats this for a while. He's standing completely still with his back to us staring at a house several doors down. The police officers come and shine a light on him. A few minutes later police officer came to our door, and we let him in. Turns out the kid was going to a party in my city, and didn't know where it was exactly. Followed me from practically work because I was about his age and going in the right direction. Was completely drunk, and when the police officers pulled up he had been hanged on the sidewalk. I have sleep paralysis. I have an extreme case of it. I can go weeks on end with every night having an episode. I have a great deal more hallucinations and they go longer than the actual paralysis. A great deal of the time it's the simple intruder in my room that I wake up to. In most cases I wake up, freak out, and after a minute or two I just go back to sleep. Now and again, I'll have a bad episode and have to turn on the light for a bit just to get my bearing. Rarer still, I'll have a horrible one that causes me to get up and turn every light on in my house. They range from someone holding me down, touching me, grabbing my leg, to hearing voices and waking up to someone standing on my bed, standing in the corner, or perched somewhere staring at me. The weirdest and longest hallucination actually involved me waking up and eventually sitting up to look out my window as I heard my car door shut. Someone was in the driver's seat trying to start it. I watched him for a good minute, wondering what was going on as I could barely keep my eyes open and make out a face. I snapped to and threw on some pants and ran outside to find out no one was there. Back in 2005, I was 21 maybe 22 at the time and went to see a movie with a friend of mine. We got back, dropped him off at his house and went to mine. It is 0.3 miles. I just looked. I got home, walked inside through the garage, my stepbrother told me to call my brother, and someone knocked on the door. It was my friend. He arrived at my house roughly 45 seconds after I drove there. He was holding his son who was only 3 or 4 months old, and he was blue. I stood for what seemed like forever then started yelling for my parents to wake up, both were nurses, burst into their room, screaming to wake up and the entire house comes running out to me and my friend with his dead son. I was on the phone with 911 for about 35 minutes while my parents and brother performed CPR, the ambulance was outside with him after that for another 25 minutes, and then I drove them to the hospital. I sat with them for 3 hours while the ER staff tried to save him. I had no words and could only be there with them. After they pronounced him and went through some questions, the police followed us home and ransacked their house collecting diapers, clothes, etc. as evidence. I wasn't until about 9 a.m. that I went home and 11 a.m. before I fell asleep. It took about a week for me to feel normal again, but worse was my friend. She dressed their son's teddy bear in his clothes and pushed it around for weeks because she couldn't cope with the loss of their son. Worst day of my life. Ever. I'm a native, Kiowa tribe. Whether this has any bearing on the occurrence that I'm about to describe, I don't know, it's merely for descriptive purposes. In any case, I grew up in a housing addition where most of the Kiowas in my hometown have lived since the addition was built. There were several other kids my age who lived there too. It consists of 3 streets connected by 2 streets on either side. My grandma lives on one of the corners at the end of the middle street. The street that connects all 3 main streets is bordered by a standard-sized farmer's barbed wire fence with farmers' properties on the other side. There's a street lamp on the corner just outside my grandma's house. One night when I was about 15 or so, I was out under that lamp with 2 friends talking and joking and whatnot. Suddenly I notice an animal-like figure sitting by the fence in the corner where the other main street starts. There's a street lamp there as well, but the figure was sitting in a spot that was obscured by shadows caused by a couple large trees with overhanging branches. It is facing away from the fence, is very still and makes no sound. It appears to be all black, sits in its hind legs like a canine, and I can clearly see its eyes emitting a soft, yellow glow. I point it out to my friends and ask, "What is that?" They turn to look, and we all stare trying to make sense of it. It looks straight at us for a few seconds that seem like eternity, then in one fluid motion, turning while it jumps over the fence, a good 5 feet high, it disappears into the darkness, making no sound, though there was only tall grass and fallen leaves and branches on the other side of the fence. Needless to say, we noped right out of there to my friend's grandma's house on the street on the far end of where we saw the creature. My family was at a powwow, so nobody was at my grandma's house, and there was no way I was staying there alone after that. We told my friend's grandma what we saw, and she told us there are many mysterious things in the dark in the area of Oklahoma where I come from, deep southwest, and to just be glad that it wasn't malignant. There are many strange things that happen out there. I've grown up with boatloads of stories from aunts, uncles, grandparents, etc. I don't think I want to know what it was. Wendigo psychosis, when people go insane over long winter periods and turn cannibalistic for no determinable reason. The Wendigo is part of the traditional belief systems of various Algonquian-speaking tribes in the northern United States and Canada, most notably the Ojibwe in Saulteaux, the Cree, the Naskapi, and the Innu people. 5. Although descriptions varied somewhat, common to all these cultures was the conception of Wendigos as malevolent, cannibalistic, supernatural beings, manitous, of great spiritual power. 6. They were strongly associated with the winter, the north, and coldness, as well as with famine and starvation. One of the more famous cases of Wendigo psychosis reported involved a Plains Cree trapper from Alberta, named Swift Runner, 22, during the winter of 1878, Swift Runner and his family were starving, and his eldest son died. 25 miles away from emergency food supplies at a Hudson's Bay Company post, Swift Runner butchered and ate his wife and 5 remaining children. 23, given that he resorted to cannibalism so near to food supplies, and that he killed and consumed the remains of all those present, it was revealed that Swift Runner's was not a case of pure cannibalism as a last resort to avoid starvation, but rather of a man suffering from Wendigo psychosis. 23, he eventually confessed and was executed by authorities at Fort Saskatchewan. 24. Another well-known case involving Wendigos was that of Jack Fiddler, an Oji Cree chief and shaman known for his powers at defeating Wendigos. In some cases, this entailed euthanizing people suffering from Wendigo psychosis. As a result, in 1907, Fiddler and his brother Joseph were arrested by the Canadian authorities for murder. Jack committed suicide, but Joseph was tried and sentenced to life in prison. He ultimately was granted a pardon but died 3 days later in jail before receiving the news of this pardon. I once had a teddy named Spock, his ears were pointy, we were inseparable. I'm guessing I was given him aged March 4th. I loved that bear. Once my elder brother snatched Spock from me and repeatedly punched him. I remember bursting into tears. I laugh about that now. Something I will never laugh about happened to Spock. Maybe I was 8 at the time, but I'm not sure. My age is probably the only part one am unsure of. Everything else that I'm going to tell you happened, and if you don't believe it then that's okay. I doubt I would either. Went to bed, with my teddy, as per my usual routine. I woke up startled but foggy, taking a second or two to remember where I was and what night it was, etc. Immediately I noticed Spock am missing. That I woke up enough to not shrug this off and resume an unfinished dream. So, I scanned my room. Not there. Maybe my mom had taken him when I was asleep to put him through the wash. I can't remember exactly what I thought, but only that I needed him back. I left my room marching to my mum's to retrieve my beloved bear. Only Mum wasn't in her room. Strange. I knew it was late, the middle of the night even. She wouldn't be in my brother's room, would she? I checked, doing that thing of turning on every available light as I progressed through the house. No one was in my brother's room. Genuinely worried now, I marched slowly downstairs, trying to manufacture anger at my mum and brother for staying up late downstairs and falling asleep, for scaring me. They weren't there. I was young, but I knew my mum enough to know she would never ever leave me home alone. My brother may play a trick on me, but not my loving mum. I'd checked the whole house. The whole deathly quiet house. What do you do when you can't escape that level of fear? I had nowhere else to check, nowhere to go. Then I heard a noise from the basement. I'd forgotten about the basement. This knowledge terrified and soothed me in equal measure. They must be down there, I don't know why, but they must. This way of thinking was to fortify me for the last room check. A room I hated. I approached the basement door and realized it was slightly open ajar. Now up to this point I'd kept silent, don't know why, maybe an intuition. But I pressed open that door and screamed, literally screamed with everything I had, Mom, no answer. I went down a couple of steps just to reach the light switch. ID found Spock. I could see his lower half sticking out from behind a tool kit. It was as if I was being beckoned into the basement to retrieve him. No thanks. I ran back to my room and hid under the bed. My mum woke me the next morning by calling breakfast from downstairs. So, it had been a dream. But why did I wake under the bed? Am I a sleepwalker now? Cool. But Spock was missing, and at breakfast my mum and brother asked me why all the lights were on in the house when they got up. My brother said if it was me then I'm in trouble. I asked them about leaving the house, but they didn't know what I was talking about. Later I told Mum what happened, and she was genuinely concerned. She looked for Spock everywhere including the basement, but he was never seen again. So, it's September 11th, 2001. I was in 4th grade, and it was 1 week before my birthday, so I was pretty excited as any soon-to-be 9-year-old would be. My teacher gets a call around 9 a.m. and tells me I'm being called to the head office. I'm kind of confused but blissfully oblivious until I get there. My mother was on the brink of tears, and she had my older brother and my 6-month-old baby brother with her, and the only thing she could say was, "Something terrible happened." On the way home she and my brother filled me in and told me about the attack on the WTC. She also mentioned that she couldn't get in contact with my father, a New York police officer of 20 years. I got home and the news was on, and I guess the whole situation hadn't quite settled in yet, because I remember not exactly being panicked or upset. I was more concerned about my mother. A few hours later my mother finally gets in contact with my father and he's completely okay. I found out later that he was supposed to have been in the second tower helping evacuate when it collapsed, but because the officer before him came back late from his shift, my father didn't get there when he was scheduled to and was about 2 blocks away when the tower came down. If that other officer had ended his shift on time, my father would have been buried in the debris. I guess I never really considered that to be scary until years later when I realized that without that unbelievably lucky break my mother would have been widowed with 3 kids. The whole incident scared my father too, and he retired a year or 2 later. Back then when I was in 7th grade, my dad couldn't pick me up from school with his car, so my mom usually walked all the way to my school, picked me up, and walked back home with me. One day, I felt ready enough to do the walk alone. I was about 10 minutes from home when this white truck pulled up next to me and called me over, asking for help. Being stupid, I approached him. I was naive and fairly innocent, but I noticed something wasn't right. His pants were unzipped, and his flaccid-looking donger was hanging out, with some sticky goo around it. I just decided not to look at it and help this guy out as quickly as possible. He wanted to know where some street was, but I was new here, so I told him I didn't really know. All I could give him was directions to Walmart and maybe he could find his way there. So, he asked me to come in his van and show me where Walmart was, but I didn't want to. I told him I'll give him a map. So, he takes out some paper and pencil and tells me to draw. He grabs my hand and makes me touch his thing, my skin crawls just remembering, and the sticky goo gets all over my hand. He kept doing it over and over, and finally I managed to take my hand away and I ran. I started crying, then I saw his truck pull up again just ahead of me and he turned off his car. I panicked. I ran back and stood just outside a packed Chinese restaurant and started crying hysterically. I remember wildly thinking, do I go inside? But I don't have money, what if they ask me what I want to order? So, I just stayed at the door for a while, maybe an hour or so, then I took a peek to make sure he was gone before I continued on home. When I arrived at the house, my mom was already on her way out with a worried expression on her face. She saw my tear-stricken face and asked what was wrong. I was so embarrassed and didn't want to tell her outside, so I just shook my head and told her I'll let her know later. I made sure to wash my hand with a ton of soap and rubbed alcohol on it. I remember making a pact to never use that hand again. When I told her what happened, my mother was so angry and asked me if I remembered the license plate, what he looked like, etc., but I didn't remember. She then told me she just had this gut feeling something was terribly wrong before I even got home. I remember asking her not to tell my dad or my sister because that was so embarrassing, like it was my fault. I don't even know why I thought like that. I always think it's so strange when victims blame themselves, or are embarrassed of what happened, but then I remember my own story and then I kind of understand even though I know it doesn't make sense. I was in the marching band in my first year of high school and had to go to every football game. This is Texas, so high school football is important. It's a home game, at my school's college-sized stadium. A warm fall night, the AstroTurf is bright green under the stadium lights, the Jumbotron animates words of encouragement, bats snatch insects draw to the bright lights above us. The Chaparrals are winning, there's only a few more minutes left on the clock. During most of the game the crowds are constantly cheering, the bands playing fight songs, and the cheerleaders and highline chanting. Except when a player gets knocked down, then the stadium quiets down a bit while people wait for the kid to pop back up so they can all cheer especially loud for him. Welp, a kid gets hit hard and goes down. And stays down. Things start quieting down. First the bands and cheer squads quit making noise, then the shouting fans quit down, then the random chatter starts to die out, after a long while the entire stadium, over 9,000 people, is dead silent. Until a lone woman starts wailing. His mother. And it stretches out for ages. Minutes pass. Eventually an ambulance drives onto the field and takes the boy away. I learned later that he shattered the C4 and C5 vertebrae in his neck. He's paralyzed from the shoulders down. Kid eventually dies at 20. That woman's cries of fear and grief, echoing past the thousands of people sitting there in the most uncomfortable, shocked silence. Creepiest thing that's happened to me. Last month, my father sent me a disc he made with his old cam tapes he had recorded when I was young. There is around 1 hour and a half of different videos about me. Birthday party, hockey games, Christmas, and plenty of other videos. Really lame and boring for the most. But there is one strange video. It happens during summer, someone is filming me from the basement window while I am playing outside. I was jumping repeatedly into a little children's pool. The camera was zooming in and out on my face. This video lasts for about 5 miles. Sometimes we see my mother in the background taking care of the garden and keeping an eye on me. Even if I was young, 7 to 8 years old, I can perfectly remember that day. My mom was outside taking care of the garden and checking on me. She never left the area because she was too afraid that I could drown. My father was staying at the hospital at that time and my older brother was in another town. So, I was wondering. Who was filming me in my basement? I asked my family about this, and they were terrified when I showed this video to them. I'm so glad I'm not living there anymore, too many weird things happened there. This happened when I was 8. My family lived in the country, and we had a neighbor who lived directly beside us, with a thin line of trees separating our properties. The nearest neighbors apart from him were about 2 kilometers away in any direction. This neighbor had a street lamp in his yard. Our road had no streetlights, so at night his light was the only one visible on our road. It was on a timer, and would turn on at about 8 p.m., and stay on until about 1 a.m. This alone scared me when I was a kid. The light shined directly into my bedroom, but the thin line of trees cast shadows on my wall. Sometimes I was fine with them, sometimes they scared me, but they were always just shadows. On this night though it was different. I was lying in bed, unable to sleep, twisting and turning, when I lay on my back and looked up at the ceiling. I saw a crudely shaped face on the ceiling made of light, like a shadow was being cast on my ceiling from the light through my window. However, I looked out my window and there was no light coming through it. I looked at my clock and it was 2 a.m., meaning my neighbor's light had been out for an hour. I stared at this face for a long time. I don't really know how long, but the longer I stared at it the more scared I got. Eventually, I called my mom. I started screaming because I was an irrational little kid. When she got to my room, I told her not to turn the light on, and to look at my ceiling. I was staring at the face, but she couldn't see anything. She said it was pitch black and that I should go back to sleep. The scariest part about this story is that 6 years later when I was 14, we had moved out of that house. I told this story to my mom and my sister, and they didn't believe me until I made a drawing of the face. When my mom saw my drawing she freaked out, because apparently she had dreams of that face while we lived in that house, at least once per week, and it terrified her. Told, I saw a face on my ceiling as a kid, told my mom about it years later and drew it for her. She freaked out because she used to have nightmares of that exact same face.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.